Tonight, the verdict is in. America's most notorious living gangster hears the jury's judgment on 19 murders and a life of crime. Don Daler was in the courtroom in Boston.
My family and I are eternally grateful.
We heard for the first time today from the father of the kidnapped California girl who was rescued this weekend. Ben Tracy reports from San Diego. A Florida hotel is swallowed by a sinkhole.
It was almost like a vortex.
Manuel Bojorquez explains how this happens. And a summer camp for broken hearts. Jeff Pegues hears from the children of cops killed in the line of duty.
When it comes to your dad and dealing with your loss, what are you looking for?
Happiness.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
Good evening. One of the most infamous mobsters of the 20th century was finally brought to justice today. James Whitey Bulger, who led Boston's Winter Hill Gang in the 1970s and 80s, was convicted of federal racketeering and conspiracy charges. Those charges included 19 murders, and the jury found that Bulger planned or carried out 11 of them. Bulger was the model for the Jack Nicholson character in The Departed. He's 83 years old and could get life when he's sentenced in November. Don Daler is at the federal courthouse in Boston for us. Don?
Scott, Whitey Bulger sat stoic and emotionless as the clerk read the word guilty again and again and again. Afterwards, his attorney, Jay Carney, spoke to the media.
Mr. Bulger knew as soon as he was arrested that he was going to die behind the walls of a prison or on a gurney getting injected with a chemical that would kill him.
Over the 9-week trial, federal prosecutors argued Bulger was one of the most vicious criminals to ever walk the streets of Boston. And they said his rise from common crook to mob kingpin was made possible because he was protected as an FBI informant who supplied information on rival mobsters. That prompted many of his once loyal top deputies to testify against him, including John Martorano, a convicted hitman who spoke to 60 Minutes' Steve Kroft in 2008.
I'll go along with a lot of things, but no Judas, not no informant. I never informed or ratted on nobody. And if I could have killed him, I'd have killed him, but he wasn't there. And that's what I think he deserves.
Witnesses described Bulger's violence. He chained and tortured one of his victims before shooting him in the head. Bulger strangled Deborah Hussey because she was dropping his name around town. Kevin Weeks was Bulger's right-hand man. He spoke to 60 Minutes' Ed Bradley in 2006.
After he would kill somebody, it was like a stress relief. You know, he'd be nice and calm for a couple of weeks afterwards, like he just got rid of all his stress.
Bulger fled Boston in 1994 after a tip from a corrupt FBI agent that authorities were closing in. He spent 16 years on the run, most of that time on the FBI's most wanted list. When agents finally caught up with him and his girlfriend in 2011, they had dozens of guns and $822,000 stashed inside the walls of their California apartment. Tommy Donahue's father was killed by Bulger while he was giving one of the mobster's targets a ride home.
He killed my father in 1982. I was only a little kid, you know, so to finally hear that and hear a guilty verdict, it was a good feeling. It was a very good feeling.
Bulger will be sentenced on November 13th. Now, he is appealing. He claims he was promised immunity in return for protecting one of the prosecutors from a mob hit. And the judge, Scott, would not allow that to be brought up at trial.
Don, Bulger was an informant for the FBI back in the 1970s while these crimes were being committed. What does that tell us about the FBI office in Boston at that time?
It has been a real black eye for them, Scott. In fact, one of the prosecutor's main witnesses was a man named John Morris, who was a disgraced former supervisor for the FBI. He admitted to accepting cash and gifts from Bulger in return for tips. And the prosecutor said during trial that at least one of those tips, one of those warnings, directly led to one of the murders that Bulger was responsible for.
Don Daler in Boston. Don, thanks very much. In another criminal case that captured the attention of the nation, California teenager Hannah Anderson is spending her first night back home since she was kidnapped more than a week ago. A horrible ordeal that began with the murders of her mother and her younger brother. Ben Tracy is in San Diego for us tonight. Ben?
Scott, Hannah Anderson's father, Brett, brought his daughter home to San Diego today. And in a brief statement here at the Sheriff's Department in San Diego, he thanked everyone for their support and then asked for privacy.
Brett Anderson says his family needs to grieve and heal now that his 16-year-old daughter, Hannah, has been found.
The healing process will be slow. She has been through a tremendous, horrific ordeal. I'm very proud of her, and I love her very much.
On August 4th, the bodies of Anderson's mother, Christina, and 8-year-old brother, Ethan, were found inside James Lee DiMaggio's burning home near San Diego. DiMaggio, a family friend, is believed to have then kidnapped the 16-year-old, which led to a highly publicized Amber Alert and an international manhunt. On Wednesday, nearly 1,000 miles from San Diego in a remote area of Idaho, a group of 4 horseback riders saw the pair. They say Anderson looked scared and was wearing pajama bottoms. Mark John was one of the riders.
There was just like a square peg going into a round hole. They didn't fit. He might have been an outdoorsman in California, but he was not an outdoorsman in Idaho.
They later recognized Anderson in a televised Amber Alert and called police. They told the FBI that DiMaggio had a gray cat with him. Agents searching for them spotted the cat from the air, and that led them to DiMaggio. A tactical hostage rescue team was dropped into the woods and hiked 2 hours to DiMaggio's campsite to rescue Anderson. A federal official says DiMaggio had at least 2 guns and fired at the agents, who then shot and killed him. San Diego Sheriff Bill Gore says Hannah Anderson was definitely taken against her will.
She was a victim in this case. She was not a willing participant, and she was under extreme duress from the time she left Boulevard to the time she was recovered at Lake Moorhead, Idaho.
A friend of Hannah Anderson says that James Lee DiMaggio once confessed that he had a crush on her and that she felt uncomfortable around him. Now, we also learned, Scott, today that Hannah Anderson did not know that her mother and her brother had been killed until after she was rescued.
Ben, thanks very much. A federal judge ruled today that the nation's largest police force singled out blacks and Hispanics in a tactic that's called stop, question, and frisk. The judge ordered New York City to change the policy, which allows an officer to search a person for a weapon even when there is no suspicion of a crime. The mayor credits stop, question, and frisk with a historic drop in violent crime in the city. And here is Terrell Brown.
The New York City Police Department stopped more than 500,000 people last year under their stop, question, and frisk policy. 87% were black or Latino. David Auerlich says he was 15 the first time he was stopped. It happened 3 more times while he was in college. That's when he joined the lawsuit against the city.
As I'm walking away, I tell him, you think I'm just some dumb young kid that's going to stand for this. I'm not. I'm going to stand up for myself. I'm going to fight this. And he just laughed and said, I love it when you fight. You guys aren't going to win. You're not going to win.
In today's decision, federal judge Shira Shinlin wrote the city violated New Yorkers' constitutional rights. In their zeal to defend a policy that they believe to be effective, they have willfully ignored overwhelming proof that the policy of targeting the right people is racially discriminatory. Last year, a little over 9% of those stopped were arrested. But Mayor Michael Bloomberg defended the program. He said it's prevented more than 7,300 murders since he's taken office.
And there is just no question that stop, question, frisk has saved countless lives. And we know that most of those lives saved, based on the statistics, have been black and Hispanic young men.
Mayor Bloomberg will appeal the judge's ruling, but Scott, in the meantime, New York City Police will continue to enforce the stop and frisk policy while it's under review.
Terrell Brown in Times Square. Terrell, thanks. Also today, the Attorney General of the United States announced a major shift in a policy that has long required mandatory prison time for low-level drug dealers. Eric Holder told the American Bar Association that the criminal justice system is broken in many ways. Holder said that since mandatory prison for drug offenses began in the 1980s, the federal prison population has grown by 800%. Holder says he will now stop charging many nonviolent drug suspects with crimes that carry the mandatory sentences. To understand what this problem looks like, we asked John Blackstone to show us the prisons in California, which has its own mandatory sentencing for drug offenses.
In California, about 120,000 inmates are crowded into state prisons designed to hold just 80,000. Prison gymnasiums have been turned into dormitories, and even county jails are full. All this is part of the legacy of California's three strikes law passed in 1994. San Francisco's chief jailkeeper is Sheriff Ross Mirkarimi. California seemed to be a leader in get tough on crime. That jammed up our prisons.
This is true, and it's important that we continue to optimize our response to public safety, but the goal is rehabilitation.
California's packed prisons have had limited success at rehabilitation. 63% of released felons in the state are back behind bars within 3 years. Statewide, recidivism rate is pretty high.
It's extremely high. In fact, I think it's failed in terms of the scorecard of how effective it's been.
So it shows that locking people up isn't the answer.
It is not.
Mirkarimi runs one of the few jail systems in the state that is not crowded. You actually have empty cells in here.
We do.
San Francisco stresses drug treatment programs and other community-based diversion programs that keep nonviolent offenders out of jail.
Other counties, even more conservative counties, and red and blue states, I think, are finally realizing they cannot prosecute or incarcerate their way out of the problem. Listen, the war on drugs has now entered its fifth decade, 50 years. I think the jury is in, and that the war on drugs has failed.
California is already backing away from harsh sentences for minor drug crimes, as Attorney General Holder recommended today. Last November, Californians voted to limit the three strikes law, Scott, so that most nonviolent crimes will no longer bring a life sentence.
John Blackstone in our San Francisco newsroom. John, thank you. A security guard at a Florida resort is being called a hero tonight for running from door to door last night, waking up guests as his building slipped into a sinkhole. It happened in Clermont, Florida, just 10 miles from Disney World. Here's Manuel Bajorquez.
More than 100 guests were in this building when the ground began to shake. Maggie Gamry and her 3-year-old son had just checked in.
It was almost like a vortex. The building twisted initially and then started crumbling. Windows were exploding. People were throwing their luggage out of the window.
Within hours of the evacuation, 1/3 of the building had crumbled into the 100-foot wide sinkhole. Sinkholes are common in Florida. They are created when the layer of limestone beneath the soil is washed away by seeping water. The thin bridge of clay and soil that remains can collapse, sinking into the cavity below. Everyone at the resort made it out safely. When you look at that and you think that you and your child were in that room,
It really was a near-death experience, and all I can do is be so very thankful.
the sinkhole is 2 stories deep and possibly getting deeper. Scott, a team from the U.S. Geological Survey arrived this afternoon to determine whether it might also grow wider.
Manuel, thank you. A father has been charged with interfering in the adoption of his daughter. Shooting stars are lighting up the night sky. And an emotional reunion as a mother panda meets the cub she hasn't seen since birth. When the CBS Evening News continues. We have an update for you tonight on a bitter custody dispute that went all the way to the Supreme Court. It involves a girl who will turn 4 next month, her adoptive parents, and her biological father, who turned himself in today on charges of custodial interference. Here's Elaine Quijano.
It's been a nightmare. I mean, we just want our daughter back.
Matt and Melanie Capobianco took this picture with Veronica in 2011, just before they lost custody to her biological father. They fear the next step in their fight for their adopted daughter could be police forcibly removing her from his home in Oklahoma.
How would you feel about that?
I'd feel awful about it. It's the last thing we want, but our daughter's coming home.
For 2 years, the Capobiancos raised Veronica in their South Carolina home. Her biological father, Dustin Brown, had given up his parental rights. But later, Brown, who is Cherokee Indian, invoked a federal law that protects Native American children from being separated from their families. He was awarded custody 19 months ago.
What was the last thing you said to Veronica?
We told her we loved her and we missed her, and she told us, "I love you too. I love you, Mommy. I love you, Daddy." And that was the last thing we ever said to her.
What's been the hardest part of this for you, Melanie?
Not knowing if my daughter was crying out for me and not being able to do anything about it. That was the hardest part.
The Supreme Court ruled the federal law did not apply in this case because Brown, quote, abandoned the Indian child before birth and never had custody. We sat down with Brown shortly after the decision in June.
To take her from us right now would devastate her, would ruin her world.
Since then, a South Carolina court has finalized Veronica's adoption, and authorities there have charged Brown with custodial interference for failing to appear with Veronica at a court-ordered meeting a week ago. Brown surrendered to Oklahoma authorities this morning.
What would you say to Dustin Brown?
I guess that I understand where he's at, because I was there. She's not coming to strangers. She knows us. We love her. We're going to take good care of her. So please just, let's just all try and get along and do what's right for her.
Dustin Brown is free on bail. Veronica is being cared for by Brown's wife and his parents in Oklahoma. Scott, the Capobiancos have appealed to federal and state authorities to help bring their daughter back to South Carolina.
Elaine, thanks very much. The solution to California's traffic headaches may not be a pill, but a capsule. That story is coming up. Imagine traveling from LA to San Francisco, 400 miles, in just half an hour. SpaceX founder Elon Musk rolled out plans today for a pneumatic tube that would carry passengers as fast as 800 miles an hour in aluminum capsules. The price tag for the Hyperloop, as he calls it, $6 billion. It's similar to this system, proposed by a Colorado inventor, Daryl Oster. It works like those pneumatic tubes that transport capsules stuffed with paperwork in older buildings. If it's a clear night where you live, you may be able to catch quite a light show tonight. The annual Perseid meteor shower is at its peak, with as many as 100 meteors an hour hitting the atmosphere. Some could be visible as soon as it gets dark, but astronomers predict that your best view will come after midnight. In Taiwan, a mother panda has been reunited with the cub that was taken from her shortly after birth. The baby panda spent 5 weeks in an incubator because of a leg injury. Then, last week, zoo workers brought her to Mom, who reacted just as any other mom would. Officials say they'll soon be together again for good. If there is a special place in heaven for heroes, there is a special place on earth for their children, and we'll take you there next. Finally tonight, 62 police officers have died in the line of duty this year, more than 19,000 in all of U.S. history. Memories of them endure in the marble walls of Washington and in the tender hearts of the children they leave behind. There is a place that can help heal those hearts, and Jeff Pegues talked to some of the children who go there.
Your memories of your dad, what will they be?
That he was cool.
Ian Crane's father died a hero. 34-year-old Michael Crane, a veteran Riverside, California police officer, was gunned down in February by ex-LA cop Christopher Dorner, a man with a vendetta against the LAPD.
I just hope this doesn't happen to anyone else.
No way! Ian has come to a place called C.O.P.S camp, where the mission is to give the children of fallen officers the help they need to rebuild their lives. This 10-year-old's wounds are still fresh.
When it comes to your dad and dealing with your loss, what are you looking for?
Happiness.
What do you mean?
I'm never happy anymore.
There are 137 other children at the camp in various stages of living with their grief.
There was 5 bad guys behind my dad and in back of him and in front of him, and then they shot him 9 times.
Children ages 6 to 14.
My dad died by car crash.
They make these memory boxes as a way of coping.
This is my favorite picture of me and my dad on Easter Sunday at my grandmother's house.
There are daily counseling sessions encouraging the children to talk about their loss. And then in the afternoons, the high ropes course and other activities designed to instill courage and confidence. Jennifer Crane is Ian's mother.
I wanted him to feel that he wasn't alone and that there was this community that would be here to support him. I hope he feels at some point where, everybody just gets it and it's a place you can be where the healing can begin.
There is a saying at this camp, the people who come here are part of a group no one wants to belong to.
Is there something in that picture that tells you something about your dad?
They loved me.
They call themselves survivors, the sons and daughters of fallen cops, inspiring each other to overcome and keep going. Jeff Pegues, CBS News, East Troy, Wisconsin.
And that's the CBS Evening News for tonight. For all of us at CBS News all around the world, good night.